School Ties is a 4-part documentary series in which leading South African experts unpack grooming and sexual abuse of learners at some of South Africa's most prestigious boys' schools. The docuseries, which premiered on Thursday, uncovers the truth behind these violations in schools across the country, the aftermath, and what government, schools and societies are doing to stop the abuse in its tracks. We are now joined in studio by, Elle Oosthuizen, who is the producer from Idea Candy. Thank you so much for making time for us this morning. Also joining us in studio is Robyn Vorster, who is child protection activist and also contributor to this docuseries. Thank you so much, ladies, for making time for us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's start off here. How did this idea come about?
The idea came about when we realized that there were, this topic keep on coming up, and people shying away from this topic, and don't touch on it. And then for us at Idea Candy, it's important then to dive deep into this topic and go there's definitely a story to tell, and we need to set the record straight and, let the public know something needs to be done.
When you say it kept on coming up, can you give us maybe instances where there's a story that broke
Little stories that broke, and Robyn wrote some stories or an article that will, or a news bulletin with a predator, little news bulletins that will happen and that we will see.
Yeah, and I think the other thing about this, Robyn, is that a lot of the times when we speak about sexual grooming of children, the image that pops up in our minds is normally a girl child.
Yes.
But what we realize actually that boy children are also very vulnerable, and sometimes also because of the lack of having the language to say, this has happened to me.
Exactly. So often the victimhood of boys is just not acknowledged. And in fact, they're even seen as perpetrators in waiting rather than victims, if they're even believed. And in fact, a lot of times they're disbelieved. There's huge disincentivization for boys to share when they've been sexually abused.
Why was it important for you to contribute to this docuseries?
I think this is a very hard topic for people to face, and most of us would prefer just not to face it. But it is happening a lot, as Elle mentioned, and I think it's really important that we prime and prepare families for how to respond to it. And also look at preparing schools, because the fact is that schools need to be able to safeguard their children. And they want to do their best, but sometimes they don't have the tools and the equipment in order to keep children safe.
I can imagine also, Elle, that there must be trigger warnings all over such a documentary.
Yes.
Tell us about the process of filming it and also how far wide it extends in terms of the coverage.
In filming such a heartbreaking topic, and I mean dealing with the people that was brave enough to share their stories with us, and then our contributors that helped us immensely. It does take an emotional toll, even on a producer and a director, to deal with this content. It is very tough, but it is necessary, and someone needs to tell it. Legal has got a big hand in this topic with us to make sure that everything we say and we uncover is legally, we are allowed to do that. This is just an important topic. We need to empower our schools, our children, our parents with the knowledge so that they know what to do should this incident
Was there any specific moment for you, Elle, where you're like, geez, this is so difficult for me? However, I need to push through because there is this vision that we have. And it goes beyond the accolades that would come to Elle's name is attached to this production. But also the horrific stories and getting, I guess, maybe some of the people that you spoke to are now in their adulthood, having to go back to what happened to them while they were children.
Yeah, it is hard, hey, especially this one, because it's dealing with kids. It was really tough. It was tough. In terms of making documentaries, you see the story, and with true crime, you kind of build this wall and you get over it emotionally, and then you can tell the story from an outside point of view. But with this one and dealing with kids and the heartbreak that came along with it, it was tough for me to kind of just stay there all the time to see the story through.
A couple of times perhaps that you broke down as well?
Yes, definitely.
Can
all
imagine.
the time.
Yeah.
All the time, yeah.
I can imagine. And Robyn, also when we look at, with the criminal justice system, for instance, when a minor is asked to come and give evidence, testify in a criminal case, and sometimes they are actually the person who's a victim of the crime that has been committed, a sexual violation in these particular cases, we see that they testify in camera because the criminal justice system recognizes something about having the child in a space where lots of questions would be asked and the cross-examination, and sometimes also the type of questions that the defense would ask, which almost makes the child reconsider whether or not it actually happened to them, or maybe how they have contributed to the violation that took place. Speak to us about the difficulty, though, from a production point of view, having to ask the difficult questions with the necessary sensitivity.
So I think that's a very important question, because we see a lot of grooming and gaslighting as part of the sexual abuse of especially children at elite schools. So their defenses are broken down slowly and systematically, and often they end up doubting their own reality. And sometimes they even have a really wonderful relationship with the person who becomes their predator. So it's very confusing for children. And now for them to have to retell those stories, and often in the process of the criminal justice system, they have to tell their stories a lot, which is really very traumatizing for children. And under cross-examination, sometimes the questions are very, very harsh. And so in one of the famous cases that's actually covered in the School Ties series, the boys who testified, who were brave enough to testify, were so re-traumatized by the process, because even the judge said, well, we don't believe you, and are you sure, and why didn't you come forward earlier? Really, really traumatic questions for the children involved. And so for a lot of children, that does feel like, well, why would you want to put yourself through this process, even though that means that that predator can no longer predate on anyone else.
Yeah. Now, how do you approach that then, while still making sure that you get the facts right? And I'll get Elle to respond to that as well. Because on one end, sure, you're dealing with a story of a minor who is relaying what happened to them, but also as a journalist and the producers behind the scenes who are putting this together is trying to get what the facts are as well. And having to ask, but are you sure that actually this happened, without coming across as though that you're second-guessing them?
Sure, so it's a difficult process. And I mean, it would be difficult anyway, because, you know, we're dealing with children when we're telling these stories. And there's a sensitivity around even how you ask those questions. But we look for corroborating evidence. We would look for what's happened in the school as a whole. We would look for other stories to reinforce those stories. And what often happens is that it's not just one child who is predated on, and it's the combined evidence that comes from all of those different children, where they will say, yes, we were alone with this teacher. Yes, there were WhatsApp messages. Technology has been a huge part of predating on children, but it's also, in a weird sense, it's our friend as well, because you often have a trail that shows, gee, that was very inappropriate behavior, which we can see far more obviously than the inappropriate behavior of, oh, that coach was a trailing hand, or they just got a little too close, or they stayed a little too close for too long. Often if that happens in private spaces, it's very hard for the child to identify, oh, that made me feel uncomfortable. But what we also see is that these predators, they'll slip up somehow. So for example, what they do as part of breaking down children's defenses is they do taboo violations. So we'll drink together, we'll smoke together, we'll do drugs together, I'll introduce pornography. And that kind of evidence is also far more obvious and far easier to access, because often when you see those taboo violations, we need to be careful, because that's a real red flag for grooming.
And Elle, tell us about that experience as well, but also around, and you know, some people would say that, no, but the child gave consent. Like, but no, we're speaking about a child here. The child cannot give consent. Yes, there was, the child participated, but you cannot say that there was consent that was given, and also the mental manipulation that takes place.
Yes, and they are still underage. I
Yeah.
mean, these kids are still underage, so even if they do give consent, and consent on a topic like sexual consent, consent to drink, consent to smoke, they're not old enough to do that. So
Yeah.
you as the grown-up, as the teacher, are supposed to definitely know that, but also protect kids if it comes to that. But like Robyn said, it's normally if one boy stands up and comes forward, there are other boys that this has happened to as well. And for the predator, the first thing and how the grooming starts, there's always a secret, secret between the predator and the victim. And from there on, it just grows, and the secret grows, and then the abuse starts.
Tell us about what the viewers can expect without giving too much away, but also how they should approach the open-mindedness that is required to watch such a documentary.
Yes, I feel it's important for the viewers to watch this, to get the knowledge, to empower them, for parents to watch this, for kids to watch this that are old enough to watch this, for schools and educators to watch this, so that they know how to deal with this situation if it arises, and to help our system, our schooling system, to put the right systems in place so that this doesn't happen, and that we can make it as difficult as possible for these predators to succeed.
Yeah. And Robyn, from your end, as we conclude the interview as well, are there any criminal cases that we expect to flow from this at all? And perhaps maybe from the work that you've done, why is it that elite schools are able to get away with this? Do they employ PR companies to try and make it disappear?
Sure, that's quite a question. So in terms of prosecutions, yes, there are ongoing cases. And in fact, we will meet the colonel who's involved in some of those cases during the School Ties story. As far as elite schools are concerned, to a large degree, they're often either ignorant of what's required in terms of reporting when there is a sexual offence, or alternatively, they are very concerned about their name and their reputation. And so what will happen is they'll do an internal investigation and they will potentially fire that person, which means that they will no longer be at their school, but they'll still be in the system and they'll still be teaching. So one of the things which we draw attention to is the fact that if there is a case like this, you are obligated in terms of the law as a school to report, and it has to be to the SAPS and to the South African Council of Educators so that there can be an investigation. And whatever you do internally is something that you can decide for yourself.
Yeah.
But that has to happen. And so, unfortunately, those schools are self-sealing. But we need to ensure that schools, they put the well-being and the safety of children ahead of their reputation. And oddly, that's the kind of school I would want to send my child to.
Yeah. Yeah, the difficulty of it all, yeah? Because on one end, the school is performing so well, and then on the other end, you hear about some of the gruesome stuff that is coming out of school, including the sexual grooming of children. Elle and Robyn, thank you so much for making time for us, and all the best with this docuseries, and let's see how the audience will receive it. Really appreciate your time. That is Elle as well as Robyn. They are behind the School Ties, it's called School Ties, currently showing on Mnet. Yes, it's currently showing on Mnet. So just go and look at your program allocations, and perhaps maybe you'd come across around what time it's playing. It's a 4-part docuseries. It promises to be an interesting one, but also be warned, there are trigger warnings on a show like this. Really appreciate your time, Robyn and Elle.